Hello, my name is Evan Marbury. I'm on staff here at Christ Central as a pastoral resident, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to discuss mental health and the gospel. And with me is Jess Cameron, and I just wanted to give her a moment to introduce herself.
I'm Jess Cameron. I'm a mental health counselor here at a private practice in Durham. I go to Christ Central, and I'm excited to be invited to talk about this topic. And hopefully it's helpful to people.
Yeah, so I think first things first is discussing the whole idea of mental health and the gospel. I don't want to take anything for granted. So we're both mental health counselor. You can edit that, right? Mental counselors. It might be mental, but anyway, we're both licensed counselors, and we get to see clients throughout the week. And I know for me, often counsel Christians, and they often feel like their mental health and their spiritual walk and Christian walk are often in conflict. And you just take a moment and just share from your perspective, how does mental health and the gospel connect?
I'm going to quote one of my seminary professors, Mark Futato, who says that because God has feelings and we're created in the image of God, feelings are a part of our human experience. And so we shouldn't separate the things that we feel from our walk with the Lord. And often I see and have experienced for myself Christians who either suppress their feelings because they don't feel like they should have certain ones or whatever that may be, or they're controlled by their feelings. And for me, the clearest place that I see the integration of having feelings, intense feelings even, and not being controlled by them and not suppressing them and then giving them to the Lord is in the Psalms. And I know that's what I encourage Christians to lean into when they're concerned about feeling anxious or angry or have thoughts of despair. There's a psalm for every emotion you could think of. And so integrating that into your spiritual life, having a robust rhythm with the Psalms, I think is integral to understanding how mental health and the gospel intersect. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about mental health and the gospel too.
Yeah, definitely. And I completely agree. I mean, I often tell people that we serve an emotional God that has a firm grasp on the range of emotions. And so we being made in his image, we get that. We're born with that. We have the full range of our emotions, yet we're fallen. And we experience the brokenness and sin. And so we often respond to that full range of emotions in various ways, whether through suppression or misplaced expression. Some people have been taught that there are only one or two okay expressions, and so they try to funnel all of these emotions into these one or two things, and then find out that doesn't work, and so overreactions happen and all these different things. And really what's happening in our hearts and our emotions is saying there's other things going on that are prompts to look to the Lord, both to connect with him, but also prompts to surrender to him. That we get to feel a sense of helplessness when we feel our emotions at times, and saying, okay, we serve a God that is much more mature and strong and vast and good, and he can bear the weight of all of our feelings, and we don't have to control them. And I heard you mention the Psalms. Just just out of curiosity, is there a psalm that you feel like is a favorite of yours when you think about emotional realities in the Lord?
Well, the one that comes to mind right now is Psalm 88, and it's a psalm of lament. And I think if lament isn't a part of your spiritual disciplines, it ought to be, and especially in a season of global lament. And what's interesting about this psalm is that it doesn't necessarily end with a resolution. And I feel like for me in this time where there's not necessarily a resolution or an end point that we know of, and that could be true of any suffering that you're experiencing, it really is an invitation to cry out before the Lord and Your despair in crying out to the Lord is not a commentary on your faith or how you stand before Him, but because you are crying out to Him, like that speaks volumes to the God that you serve. And so I know for me that's been, I mean, it's a dark psalm, but sometimes that's been a real comfort for me. Especially
Absolutely.
recently.
Yeah. Go read Psalm 88.
Go read it.
It's a very emotional psalm, and it doesn't have a felt sense of resolution, but it's just honest. And we would do well to take the lament psalms more seriously. I mean, they are the biggest genre of the psalms. You're more likely to find a lament psalm than any other psalm, and that doesn't often translate into the spiritual reality of the Christian. And shame can often come with that. So we see in the Psalms a questioning of God's love, a questioning of God's promises, a questioning of God's presence even. But it's not blasphemy, it's not sin, but it's a willingness to be honest and put words to an experience that is common to every man that is trying to understand this world that is broken and fallen and all of that. And I think about one aspect of that is anxiety. Anxiety is, that's the flavor of the time. That there are so many people feeling anxious and not sure how to feel about it. Am I sinning? Is something wrong? Am I spiritually immature because I'm anxious? And there's just all kinds of questions that come. And we've had many questions that have come in, and the theme, not one of many themes at least, has been anxiety. And for the person out there that's questioning, is it okay to feel anxious? How should I understand anxiety as a Christian? How would you encourage them?
Again, I'd turn to a psalm. I'd say Psalm 13 speaks a lot to anxiety and begins with the questions that we're asking ourselves. How long? When will the suffering end? And I think we can lean into that sort of rhythm with the Lord. But also we see the Bible talk about anxiety in many places. In Proverbs 13 and 14, there's places that talk about how, when we do experience anxiety, we need a kind word, or anxiety is something that really causes distress to our whole person. And so it's wise to tend to the anxiety that we're experiencing. And so it's a very normal experience that people have had throughout history. And it's in how do we address it? How do we wisely tend to the anxieties that we have? And I think we get lost. And that's why people end up in counseling. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? How I feel this way. And I think that's part of what I enjoy about being a counselor, is helping people figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it can feel overwhelming, confusing, disorienting, and having a space to kind of sort that out, I think is really important. And as I've seen anxiety with clients and just in general, even in my own life, what I notice is that anxiety, to me, it feels like there's a combination of things happening. One, fundamentally, anxiety, just like every kind of emotional prompt, is saying something matters to me. Right, something matters to me. My life matters to me. My finances matters to me. My rhythms matter to me. There's an emotional reality connection to that. But where the pivot towards anxiety comes in is when what matters to me comes under threat. Like, this matters to me, and it feels like it's threatened, that I might lose it, or it might shift. And what comes from there is, who's in control of making sure it's not under threat. And oftentimes when I see wrestling of anxiety within me, with folks I talk to, there's this cyclical feeling, okay, this thing that matters to me, whether it's finances, my family, my kids, my parenting, all these things, it's just under threat. I'm not sure it's going to be okay. And I'm at the center of trying to figure out how to get it under control. I need to figure out how to manage it. And the gap between that threat and my feelings of management, that's where anxiety often incubates. And so this this season of COVID, I'm not so sure that it's creating anxiety. I think that's part of it, but maybe it's more so reveals anxiety because there's been people that you've always, your parents and your kids has always mattered to you. You've always felt under threat when something happens, but now this whole other thing that creates a sense of I'm out of control with this thing that matters to me and is under threat, and I can't seem to get my hands on it. And what I love about the scriptures is that it first tells you you're not in control. You've never been in control, but also there is one who is in control. And he doesn't necessarily promise that this will work out in the way that you've been thinking about at 1 o'clock in the morning when you're trying to sleep. But he does promise that he's near to us. He doesn't leave us alone. And he does actually work all things together for the good. But that's not always easy to take in.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's easy to have this truth understanding, the scriptural understanding. But again, the Psalms are beautiful in that it is honest about the gap of how I'm feeling about that. Psalm 42, why are you cast down, O my soul, within me? There's an acknowledgement of that, while also, no, I need to hope in God. And that's what I need to be doing. That's what I need to be following, even though it's hard. And I think we all can relate to that. We do not love God, look to God as our source and resource as we should, but that doesn't mean that he's not still there and inviting us into surrender to who he is in our lives.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy question every Christian should ask themselves. And in my darkest places of suffering, I've had to wrestle with it. If your circumstances never change, is God still enough? Is God still good? And do you really believe that? And there's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, and I even hate calling it that because the commercials are getting to me. They remind me every time that it's uncertain times. But what if this never ended? Like, would God still be good to me? And I pray the answer is yes, but on a daily level, is that true for me? And so always engaging that question in my heart, I think, puts me back in that place of, oh yeah, like God is in control. I never was, just as you were saying. Previously.
Yeah, and I think the whole idea of is God good, like that's an echo, right? We can go back to Genesis 3 and see like that was the big question that was presented to Adam and Eve, that did God really say? No, actually what he's trying to do is withhold something from you, calling into question, is God really good? And if I can be convinced that God isn't good, then I will turn to something or someone that I believe is good, that I'll rest my confidence upon. And we're seeing the residual effects of misplaced confidence. That is the fight to believe God is actually good, and that is not dependent on circumstance. And we're all in that fight in some form or another. So if someone is trying to respond and consider, okay, I'm feeling anxious, I want to respond in faith, but I need some practical ways to really lean into that well, maybe in this season in particular, but maybe just in general. How do we respond or how should we respond when we feel anxious?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, God isn't going to act and move when this is over. He's acting and moving right now. And so if being in Scripture is not a daily rhythm or a weekly rhythm or whatever, if it's not a rhythm for you, I really would encourage Christians to be connected to the Lord in that way. There's not a lot that won't happen when we are in the Word, and so it won't return void in your life. So even when it's hard, be in there. That'd be the place that I'd start. And we've mentioned some places in Scripture that would be helpful to lean into when it is difficult to read and find that motivation. But also, I think we can learn a lot from evidence-based practices and what they say in treating anxiety right now. Like, how can you incorporate things like mindfulness or breathing, or being grounded in the time that you do spend with the Lord. You know, being grounded just means not being overwhelmed or overcome by your thoughts and your emotions. So if you are feeling like you're spiraling and so many thoughts are happening and you just can't get a grip, you know, what would it be like to experience physical realities? What am I touching? You know, what do I see? What are the colors? You know, you could count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 with your senses. What are 5 things that I'm touching right now? 3, 4. What are 4 things that I see? What are 3 things that I hear? 2 things that I taste. Well, probably 2 things that I smell. 1 thing that I taste. Get yourself in a place, a mindset where you can engage with the Lord without feeling just a rush of emotion or anxiety. And then with mindfulness practices, which just means being non-judgmental to the thoughts that pop into your head. You know, sometimes Christians especially beat themselves up for, you know, I was trying to pray and then this thought popped in my head and then I was, you know, mad and frustrated at myself, and so I didn't even pray anymore because I was just so frustrated. Like, God knows that. God knows our minds more than we ever will, and so how can you be mindful in your time of prayer or scripture reading, and when thoughts pop into your head that might feel irrelevant, like, don't judge them. Just acknowledge that's a thought and continue focused on the place that you're at. And there's a few more, but I want to, for time's sake, let you jump into.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would agree with all of that. The grounding is very key because part of the reality of anxiety is that it tends to be very future oriented, thinking about the possibilities. Usually it's kind of negative possibilities, but it's living in a world that doesn't actually exist. And so grounding yourself, it brings you back into the world that you really are.
Yeah.
And so engaging your 5 senses and say, this is where I am actually. And that shrinks the world in many ways, but also inviting the Lord into that. That part of the trigger or the feelings that come on is, am I alone? Because if I'm alone, I am the end all be all in figuring out X, Y, Z or whatever. And I think scripture, of course, is important in that, being reminded of the promises of God in that. But also, I do think non-judgmental, but just embrace grace. Embrace grace for yourself, that you are not alone in your concerns. And we do live in a broken world. There are so many reasons for us to experience the day-to-day moment and just long for Jesus to come back and restore all things. There are so many reasons. And feeling the weight of that is not wrong. Feeling the weight of that is reasonable. It's how we respond when we feel that. That's where we get into some trouble. And I think it's so important when Peter says in 1 Peter 5:6 that we are called to cast our cares upon the Lord. And to cast your cares presupposes that you have cares to begin with, right? So we're not trying to just get rid of anxieties and pretend like they're not a thing, or I have no care in the world. No, there are many things to be worried about and care and things that matter. But we respond by saying, Lord, these are yours. Ultimately, I want to surrender this to you, kind of a Psalm 46:1 kind of posture, that God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. That is what is true, right? That's not the hope. That's what is true. In the moments when we feel trouble, He's there. And taking these moments to breathe and go for a walk and do these grounding techniques, all of those things are so helpful, all with the understanding that ultimately where it's leading is not for us to better control our world, but to see our world and offer it to a God that is good and cares and never leaves us nor forsakes us. You know, so Lord, help us to be assured of that. You know, Jess, thank you for coming and talking a little bit about mental health and the gospel. And we'll continue to process and consider. And there are so many other topics that are worth addressing. And I pray that this short time together was helpful to you. And please, if there are other questions that come up or questions in light of what we've said, please send them to the church. Let us know how you're doing. Let us know how we can be praying. And let us know how these videos can be helpful to you. Take care.